It's about time you showed up, Fox.
Yeah, it only took you 20 years. So in case you somehow haven't heard the tale of Star Fox 2, here's a Cliff Notes version. It was originally planned for release on the Super Nintendo back in 1996. But despite being finished and ready to ship, Nintendo decided to shelve it at the last minute because of the fear that it would look too dated compared to the then 32-bit competition. Perhaps a wise move at the time, though one that also left Star Fox fans wondering what could have been all these years since. Well, wonder no more, because after more than 20 years, the game is finally seeing a proper release as part of the Super NES Classic. And that is super exciting. I mean, it's not every day, or really any day, that you're able to experience a Nintendo game for the first time that you had expected to 20 years earlier. So the question is, does Star Fox 2 hold up? And was it worth the wait? Well, let's find out. So Star Fox 2 is fundamentally a very different game from the original. Whereas that game was a simple on-rail shooter, with every enemy's placement and movement being orchestrated in advance like a space ballet, Star Fox 2 is considerably more open, now being an entirely free-roaming affair, allowing you to visit any level at any time, while also affording a full 360 degrees of freedom, aka all-range mode. And let me tell you, it feels weird to have this level of control in a game that looks like, well, the original Star Fox. On top of this, your Arwing can also turn into a walker while exploring planets or the insides of spaceships, which grants you greater maneuverability, but at the expense of speed. And speed is a big factor in this game. And that's because the clock is always ticking in Star Fox 2. You see, the world map is an active battlefield, with Andross's troops constantly advancing towards Corneria in an effort to destroy it. And they don't care whether you're caught up in a mission or not, they'll keep moving regardless. So the longer you take to complete your objective, the more progress Andross's troops will make, and the greater a peril that Corneria will be in. Because once it sustains 100% damage, it's game over. Now you can always hit pause during a mission to scope out what's happening on the world map, and if things look dire, you can quit the mission to try and intercept Andross's forces elsewhere on the map. But if you do so, you'll have to start that mission over from scratch once you come back later. So in case you haven't figured it out, Star Fox's objective is to eradicate Andross's forces from the Lilat system, which is a task complicated by the fact that the planets under Andross's control will continually launch missiles that home right in on Corneria, and that's where the strategy comes into play. Do you go on the offensive to try and wrestle back control of the planets to prevent more missiles from being launched? Or do you temporarily go on the defensive to take down Cornerian-bound enemies and missiles before they can do some serious damage? But remember, if you end up taking too long, even more missiles might be launched in the meantime. Oh, and then there's the fact that your ship's health is a persistent factor between levels too, meaning you'll have to be careful not to take too much damage as well. So it's a constant battle of assessing risk versus reward, of when to go on the attack and when to hold back. And the constant threat of Corneria's looming destruction is the heart and soul of Star Fox 2. It lends the entire game a sense of intensity that few games possess, one that makes every action have weight. And thank goodness too, because the game's core gameplay isn't particularly engaging by itself, at least in the vacuum of space. Dogfights consist of little more than taking potshots at enemies that fly straight at you before turning around and doing it again. And the planetary missions aren't much better, requiring you to find a certain amount of switches to gain access to a base, where you'll then navigate some boring corridors to reach a boss, which almost always boils down to the same strategy of circling around it while shooting. The missions can be repetitive and lack the meticulous design and skill requirements of its predecessors' on-rail levels. It's a little ironic that the greater player freedom in Star Fox 2 comes at the expense of levels that feel limited by that. But thankfully, the missions don't exist within a vacuum, and when combined with a genuinely novel real-time world map conceit, Star Fox 2 can be quite enjoyable, constantly pushing you to play better and faster, both to save Corneria as well as earn a better ranking at the end of the game, and eventually unlocking the final difficulty level. And speaking of difficulty, I strongly recommend playing the game on hard mode instead of the poorly titled normal mode, which I found to be incredibly easy, so much so that it undermined the entire point of the real-time world map. But once I cranked it up to hard, that's when I really began to appreciate the intricacies of the gameplay. Now, it's impossible to talk about Star Fox 2's visuals without taking into account the context of how the game came to be. And within that context, Star Fox 2 can both impress, as well as be pretty ugly. Some moments honestly blew me away, and that's honestly hard to believe it could run on the original Super Nintendo. The mere act of being able to fly anywhere in 3 dimensions, including around giant space structures, is impressive. And a few moments even ran at a shockingly smooth frame rate, again by Super Nintendo Star Fox standards. And one planet-based mission in particular really surprised me when I discovered it had both an aerial as well as an underwater segment. There are also some really neat details, like how when a battleship begins charging its laser on the world map, you'll actually see that reflected in the actual mission to destroy it too. But on the other hand, the game is bogged down by some ugly and repetitive interiors, especially when you discover how much the game can chug during boss battles, with a frame rate cratering to just barely a notch above completely unplayable. The music too seemed mostly forgettable, and lacked the awesome punch and catchiness of the original soundtrack, although I do quite like the title screen theme. So all in all, I like Star Fox 2. It's very different from what you might expect, but if you give it a chance, it might just sink its addictive teeth into you. And it really is a game that amounts to more than the sum of its parts. Plus, it's just gosh darn cool to be playing a new Super NES game after all these years. And with that, thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more on Star Fox 2 and everything Nintendo as well.